How were Black Africans brought to the United States of America, which was earlier disintegrated among European colonies? How were the blacks treated when they started living in America, and what inhumane behavior did they face? When did all that start, and how have Black Africans changed from viable commodities to real human beings they really are? In Africa, they had families to protect and a life to live, but in America, they had to witness the worst of all. So, how have the living conditions of African men, pregnant women and girls and children changed throughout history? They were enslaved, but with time, things changed. Laws abolishing slavery appeared, but domestic slavery continued. Even black girls were forced to give birth at 13 to have more blacks who could be used as slaves. But what are the events, laws, movements, and sacrifices that created the course of African Americans' history? Welcome to a new episode of Black Culture Diary, a channel where we talk about less-known and hidden Black history, culture, arts, and lost civilization. We scrutinize history here to bring the Black culture back on the surface again. In this episode, we will explain the history of African Americans, from how they first reached America to how they got rights at the end. Let's get started. The history of African Americans started in 1619, when for the first time, 20 Black Africans were brought on a ship to the English-controlled colony of Virginia. At that time, the United States of America didn't exist. The British, Spanish, and other European empires controlled this territory. The enslaved Africans were initially bound to work for a fixed term as contracted servants, but their population grew over time. By 1760, there were about 760,179 African Americans in the United States, and the majority were either directly imported from Africa or were the children of slave mothers. Sadly, a major blow for Black Africans came when slavery was legalized in Virginia in 1661 and all English colonies by 1750, with Africans being considered inferior. Now Africans were slaves and inferior by law, having no rights like their masters. That's when the European traders started selling Africans as slaves on ships to different parts of the world. During the journey, many slaves would die due to sickness, shock, and suicide. African Americans were forced to work on plantations in the southern United States, mainly in tobacco, rice, and indigo fields. Hence, slavery eventually became rooted in the South's cotton and sugar plantations. There was hope in the hopelessness when Thomas Jefferson passed a law to end the slave trade in 1807. However, this only led to an increase in the domestic slave trade. Black girls were forced to give birth to children at 13 and give birth more often. Since Africans could not be captured from Africa, Europeans devised this method to have more slaves. In the mid-1800s, movements to end slavery emerged in Britain and the United States. Free African Americans in the North began holding conventions, but they had different opinions on how to deal with slavery and discrimination. Some encouraged slaves to revolt, while others thought they should establish a modern Black country in Africa. African Americans founded Liberia in West Africa, foreshadowing the development of Pan-African nationalism. Then began the American Civil War in 1861. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and natural superiority. Let's continue now. Initially, the Missouri Compromise of 1820 stated that there had to be an equal number of slave and free states. Still, this agreement was violated, resulting in slavery in all American territories. The election of Abraham Lincoln as President of the United States in 1860 on an anti-slavery platform led to the Civil War. Though Lincoln initially aimed to gradually emancipate slaves with compensation for slaveholders, in September of 1862, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring all slaves free and making the Civil War a war to end slavery. Following the Civil War, nearly 4 million slaves were freed and gained citizenship and the right to vote through the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. However, these new provisions were largely ignored, especially in the South during Reconstruction. Despite the leadership of educated African Americans from the North and abroad, who gradually wielded political power in the South, economic pressure and violent anti-Black activities, such as those by the Ku Klux Klan, led to the resurgence of white supremacy and racial separation in the southern states in the post-Reconstruction years. Then World War I shaped African Americans' history. During World War I, many African Americans migrated northwards due to economic depression, and thousands of black officers were commissioned to serve in labor battalions and service regiments abroad. In 1919, Marcus Garvey, a black nationalist born in Jamaica, established the Universal Negro Improvement Association in the Harlem district of New York City. With several 100,000 members, it is considered the largest mass movement of African Americans in the country's history. Garvey's movement ended after he was jailed and deported to his home country. Even the Great Depression had a devastating effect on African Americans. They suffered substantial job losses due to discrimination, mostly ignored by Republican administrations in the 1920s. The African American community began supporting the Democratic Party, particularly in northern cities. It helped Franklin D. Roosevelt win the 1932 presidential election by establishing New Deal reforms, which provided affordable public housing, education, and more job opportunities for African Americans. The outbreak of World War II and the subsequent industrial boom in 1939 helped end the Great Depression, and President Roosevelt's support enabled African Americans to secure better-paying jobs. This led to a significant migration of Black Americans from the rural South to the industrial cities of the North, a period known as the Great Migration. However, this resulted in job competition and serious housing shortages, which led to race riots in many areas, with the worst occurring in Detroit in June 1943. Many African American soldiers were in service units during the war, and combat troops remained segregated. Nonetheless, integrated officer training was ratified, and in 1949 the armed services finally adopted a policy of full integration. Then began the civil rights movement in the 1940s and 1950s. This was a persistent and deliberate effort by African Americans to achieve equal rights through direct, nonviolent action. These actions led to various successes, including the bus boycott led by Martin Luther King Jr. in Alabama in 1955-56, the student sit-ins movement in Greensboro, North Carolina in 1960, and the freedom rides in Alabama and Mississippi to challenge segregation on interstate buses in 1961. In 1964, the Freedom Now Party was established in Michigan, and the civil rights movement gained national attention in the spring of 1963 in Alabama. Within 15 years after the Supreme Court prescribed all-white primary elections in 1944, the number of registered black voters in the South increased more than fivefold, reaching 1.25 million in 1958. The culmination of the civil rights movement was in 1963, when King addressed a crowd of about 250,000 demonstrators gathered on the Mall from the Lincoln Memorial. The march helped secure the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibited discrimination in voting, public accommodations, and employment. The post-civil rights era marked a turning point in African American history. In 1989, Douglas Wilder made history by becoming the first African American elected governor in the U.S. 3 years later, Carol Moseley Braun shattered another glass ceiling by becoming the first black woman elected to the U.S. Senate. By the turn of the millennium, the number of black office holders in the United States had skyrocketed to 8,936, an impressive increase of 7,467 since 1970. In 2001, there were 484 black mayors and 39 members of Congress who banded together to form the Congressional Black Caucus, a powerful political force dedicated to championing the needs and concerns of African Americans. Perhaps the most historical moment of all came in 2008, when Barack Obama was elected as the first black U.S. president, securing overwhelming support from African American voters. This was a landmark moment in American history, signaling a new era of hope and progress for African Americans. This period is also notable for the new Great Migration, where millions of African Americans returned to the South, including Texas, Georgia, Florida, and North Carolina, searching for better economic opportunities in desegregated cities. At this time, black African Americans had all the rights that the Constitution of the United States gave to whites. How tough a journey would it have been for African Americans, from being slaves by law to being real citizens of the same state where their ancestors were slaves? What do you think? Has the history of exploited African Americans been completed, or is it still incomplete? Let us know in the comments section right below. Don't you feel the word African American shows that blacks are still not considered full citizens of origin in America, not of Africa? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody is talking about: the black culture, civilization, history, and the evidence proving black superiority. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.